All right, guys. So I'm here with Garry from Bobcat MMA. Do you go by MMA or Jiu-Jitsu too, or just Bobcat MMA?
Yeah, Bobcat MMA, Starbrick Jiu-Jitsu, it's all the same.
Okay. And so what we wanted to talk about today, he's been playing around with some flowcharts, BJJ flowcharts recently. I told him a quick story before we got on here where I have two, but we want to expand upon that ideal and say that why it may or may not be a better method of teaching. I don't know if you want to put it that way. What do you think? How do you think it's helping you, I guess, be an instructor, but most importantly, how do you think it's helping people learn better as opposed to the maybe the standard way that everybody does jiu-jitsu typically teaching wise?
So I think the big thing is that when I have classes, I can only go over a limited amount of things. If we've got an hour class, there's the warm up, maybe half hour-ish to 45 minutes of drilling a technique, and you want to get the repetitions in, but that means you can only really cover only 3 things, right? So after I get through my 3 things in an hour class, there's rolling at the end, and then there's a break, right? And the break is from the end of that class until the next class. Now that next class might be tomorrow, it might be 3 days from tomorrow, and everybody comes at their own pace, right? So somebody might come on Mondays and Thursdays and they miss what I teach on Fridays, Saturdays, until they come back on Mondays, whatever. So they're missing out on some of that stuff. So now we've got this gap of, okay, you learn these 3 techniques from mount and you miss the transitions to go to the back, or if they roll away and I have a back take. And now I'm at this spot where I've taught them the mount, but now they don't know where to go from there, and they get stuck. And for me, it's helped. It's a roadmap, right? And that's kind of what we talked about before. It's a roadmap from point A to point Z, which is ultimately a finish. We all know that we want to get a finish. We want to have the back. We want to get a dominant position. And learning all these moves individually is good, but like now we have a linking system. We've turned it into a chain rather than this is isolated mount, this is isolated guard, this is isolated. It's a way of flowing everything together.
Okay, and so I'm writing a couple of notes down on my, if you see me looking down, and it's not, I'm not ignoring you, but so this would be my next question. So, I guess I'll kind of go through what we were talking about earlier. I had a couple students, or guys at the gym. I hate using the way student, but anyway, but like I did this because one was just having a hard time visualizing, right? So, and this is kind of how we were talking about it before. This guy is really good about taking notes. He's got a good notebook. And so every move we go over, he takes notes and he writes, makes it make more sense to him, right? Maybe if I make say a good, sentence or phrase, he'll write that down but that's really the key for him leaving. He's an older gentleman in his 70s, actually. So, he just keeps immaculate notes. I'm really impressed because really our guys that are 18, 20, it's not a fact of not remembering. I think you should keep notes because that kind of helps you progress, right? Or builds upon things. A lot of times we have ideals in our heads that, oh man, that move will help this, but then you don't take that little note, that little thought escapes your head, right? And then it probably would have made a big difference in your game if you remembered it, right? And then maybe say 9 times out of 10 you do, but that one time you don't, you've kind of missed that opportunity. So anyway, that's why it's good to take notes. So anyway, when I took his notes, I was like, why don't we organize them this way? And it just so happens I built a flow chart, and it was, look, we're going to start in closed guard. And if the guy, I'll just go straight through it. And it was, if the guy was sat back in my closed guard, I do a hip bump / mountaineer sweep, right? And so that's kind of how we started, because I was trying to go through the curriculum with him. And it went through that. I was like, but if he pushes you back down, now I can arm bar him. Or if he does this, it's on and on and on. Like maybe I sit up, he does this, I can Kimura him. Does this, I can guillotine him. But it was just literally closed guard, and then we branched off the moves. And then it went from, like, it pins me down and holds my hips. Then I can't do any of these moves anymore because they're out the window. So now we're going to branch off into this, right? So just a flow chart. So I guess my point, or what I was writing down, I wrote this for everybody, or for him, right, on a notebook. Are you writing this out for somebody, or are you just saying, hey, this is our flow chart, you need to remember?
So so what I'm doing right now is this is specifically for individuals, but then I share it with everybody. Like everybody, the core members of my group, like I just, hey, use it if you can use it. If you can't, that's fine. But like this is what happened today, and there's plenty of resources out there. They can find the YouTube. They can look at the curriculum, whatever it is they need to do. But then they can study it themselves. And for me, a lot of jiu-jitsu is kind of on my own thinking about it. And you were talking about note takers. I'm an incessant note taker. Take note, any seminar I go to, I usually have a pen and paper. And I kind of get frustrated when things go too fast because I want to take detailed notes. But I'm always taking notes before I start a lesson, before I teach a class. I write notes down. That way I don't forget this is important. Don't forget to say this. And so right before I go and teach a class, I go over all my notes, even if it's something I've done 100 times. Like, this is the hand placement here is important. Make sure I put my foot on the hip or whatever it is. That way I don't forget the important thing that I need to say. And that kind of led itself into the flow chart, just like you were saying. And I found out that I was teaching flow charts when I would teach class. So if I was in mount and there's certainly jiu-jitsu sometimes is you can be proactive or aggressive and try and make things happen. But truthfully, for me, jiu-jitsu is very reactionary. And just like you were saying before, things happen because people do things, right? And I kind of tell my guys all the time, like, submissions or positions are gifts by your opponent. Now you can make him uncomfortable and make him inspired to move in a certain direction, but until he moves, you can't do it.
Right.
And because of that, jiu-jitsu is a flow chart by itself. So I would teach it, and I use a lot of similes or metaphors to try and to do that, but it always ended up being a flow chart anyway. My favorite was like, if I've got mount and maybe I've got a hand in the collar, it's like I'm setting a fire in the room and there are 3 exits, right? And I know the 3 exits that my guy is going to go to. I try and shut the doors to 2 and beat him to the last exit. And so that's that. So it turned into like the flow chart by itself. I've got a hand on the collar. I've either got a cross choke. If he turns and rolls to a side, I slide my knee behind his head. I have the arm bar. Or if, A, B, C. It's all up to my opponent. So those flow charts became something that, like, I was teaching them already. It made sense to write them down and share with the guys.
Now, did you come up with this? Were you a teacher at some point, or is this just something, like, it's natural for teachers to kind of come up with this? Obviously you're a teacher at the gym, but I mean, in your regular life, is this anything that you had to do, or is this you just kind of helped you learn? Or
Yeah, so I work with outside of jiu-jitsu. My day job is I work with adults with various ailments or disabilities, and in that, like, it's multifaceted. Some people are tactile learners, some people are auditory learners, and trying to encompass as many learning styles as possible. Flowcharts is one of those things that we do. We have a lot of progression reports that we do, and a lot of it is like, we tried A, B, and C, and these are the results. A lot of times those kind of turned into flowcharts. Like, when we do this, these 3 outcomes are the things that happen. And so we work a lot with outcomes and stuff like that, which kind of ties into it. And so, yeah, a little bit I work with it in my everyday life.
Well, and the reason I ask you is because, quite frankly, a lot of things that we're taught in our regular jobs they're that way because they're proven methods, right? It means it works. And so I think sometimes, as all of us that are instructors, we got to be that for different reasons, right? Like in my example, there wasn't a gym here, and I didn't set out to be a jiu-jitsu instructor. It just kind of happened, right? Maybe for the same reason you. So, and the reason that's important is because if I didn't set out to be instructor, I didn't really have a clear roadmap of how to be instructor, how to teach. I just ended up doing it. So a lot of trial and error through the years. And anyway, it's the same kind of reason that you and I never talked about this before. We teach two separate gyms in two different states, right? It just so happens that we're kind of stumbling upon similar things. And then maybe too, the roundabout, maybe if I look back at it, I've kind of taught like this all the time, but never really said, hey, this is a flow chart, which makes it easier for somebody to think. Because we all do, right? We go, if the guy does this, you do this. But he may do this, and then you have to do this. That is a flow chart. We're just not talking about it, right? And I think that's very important too, because one of the things when you learn jiu-jitsu is it's not static, meaning that one of the key things, a lot of times people ask me what the difference between Japanese jiu-jitsu and Brazilian jiu-jitsu is. And this is not the podcast we're going to have or the talk that we're going to have, because this go on forever. And it's also generalization. But one of the things, because I do both, right? I'm a black belt in Japanese jiu-jitsu as well. But if I had to explain my version, I'd say it's really static. Like in Japanese jiu-jitsu, I throw a person and then I armbar him. And then I learn that, and then I get a yellow belt. And then he may do this and I do this move. And then it progresses to the next move. The difference in Brazilian jiu-jitsu is you're like, here's a armbar from guard, right? But there's 9 million ways to get this armbar, because there's 9 million ways that my guy might react. Or I may set it up by holding the collar. I may set it up by holding the sleeve. So it's one armbar, but it's a 9 million different ways. And I think that was, in my experience, and just me, that was the difference between Japanese jiu-jitsu and Brazilian jiu-jitsu. Is Brazilian jiu-jitsu expanded upon those ideals, in essence, doing a flow chart, because it's like, here's the arm bar, but if he puts his hand here, now the move's changed. You could do this and this, or it leads to a cross choke, leads to a triangle, it leads to this, where Japanese jiu-jitsu just says, here's the arm bar, you do it, and then you're going to get the next. And again, that's overgeneral. I'm not trying to make anybody mad that does that. That's my experience, right, of the two. But no, so I think, and then also too, if I was just talking, sorry, it's raining here. If it gets kind of crazy, I don't know if you hear the rain or not, but another reason it gets kind of crazy is, or this is a good method, is everybody that I've shown it to really helps. And one of the things I was writing down the notes is, I don't know if it's helped you as an instructor, but even as somebody that's constantly learning, you and I are both constantly learning. If I'm making a flow chart and all of a sudden I don't know what to write, then immediately I know that's an area that I need to work on, right? Have you found that too? Or?
Absolutely. So I had Nate come up, right? And Nate came up and kind of like did a mini seminar for leg locks. And like that all came about. One, I already knew that was a place in my game where I was struggling, as far as like I didn't have a lot of answers, and everybody's curious about the leg lock game now because it's big. So when my guys would ask me questions about it, I'd be like, one, we can go and talk to Nate when we're down in Charleston, and he can help us out with that. But I needed to bring him up and so I could learn, because the stuff that I knew, I'm like, hey, I can get into single leg X, but now what?
Yeah.
And so usually that was like, I'll sweep and I'll straight ankle lock. But now and I knew that my flow chart was now, like, I've got single leg X, and that went one route was to straight ankle lock. And then outside of that, it was scramble.
Yes.
So I needed more bubbles, right? I needed more options, because if the straight ankle lock didn't work, then I'm scrambling.
Yeah. That's a good point too, because I bring that up too. Scramble, it's not a bad thing at all, right? A lot of times you want to create a scramble, but I usually bring that up because I say, hey, if you guys just start wrestling, you don't know what you're doing. And I don't mean it in a bad way. I'm just saying, because we're in jiu-jitsu, I usually say that means there's a breakdown in your next step, because normally it's, like you said, I go this to single leg X to this to this. And so if all of a sudden you stops and you guys are just pure reactionary wrestling, and we're in jiu-jitsu and you don't wrestle, then that means like there's a breakdown. Like we need to learn that position, right?
Right.
That's perfect. And so like, really, I think if I was going to sum all this up, and you can do the same too. I think one thing I was just writing down too that I want to make sure I said is that we got to recognize too that everybody's methods are different, right? Like my flow chart could be different than yours depending on a couple of things. What I know, obviously, is number one, but number two is what I'm good at, what my game is. Like I could transition, like you could stand up in my closed guard and I could transition to spider guard, de la Hiva, X guard, and on and on and on, right? Like I keep going, right? But what chooses that method a lot of times from the get-go is what I'm good at, right? Like if I'm going to go naturally to what kind of fits my game, right? It doesn't mean like, and I'm talking about like if I just stood up basically in a squared up position. So I mean, I'm giving you the option now. You can choose the path. Like that's pretty simple. I'm not leading you to a certain position, right? And so the reason I bring that up is because that's okay to have a different method than you, as long as it makes sense, right? That's the thing. We talk to your instructor, but it's okay to have, because we talk about that in a gym all the time too. Like how many guys you run into, actually you and I've talked about this, right? You know a guy in Ohio, is it a crucifix, right? That he's really good at, right?
Yeah.
So we all know that position in some degree, but this guy, he does it everywhere, right? And he does great, and he's known for it, and he gives people. It doesn't mean that the rest of us don't know that. It just means this guy's, that's his game. It's figured out a way to do it. And it could be like you with, I don't know, like let's say it's some mount choke or something. I mean, all of us have a thing. It doesn't mean the other guy doesn't know it. Just, when I go with you, it's like, he's going to do this. He's going to get on top of me. He's going to smash past me. He's going to do this. He's going to do that. Does that mean that Nate doesn't know that? Nate's your same size. Because you have a different game. His pathway is going to be different. His flow chart is going to be, I'm going to open this guy's guard, and I may go for all leg locks. I don't even try to pass the guard. That's his flow chart, and it keeps going because if the guy reacts this way, blah, blah, blah. And then, so I think if anything, it doesn't mean anything's wrong. I think that it'll give us new areas to learn and to give it kind of like actually help in a way. Because I can say, well, Gary's flow chart's this. Should I do something different? Or, you know what I mean? Like, does that make sense what I'm saying? Kind of, I think it'd be helpful.
Well, and that's something I've told my guys, right? Is like, these are my flow charts, and most of the stuff that the flow charts that I've made are stuff we're currently working on. So I'm already teaching the flow charts, and I just put it on paper. It essentially is the only difference. But I told the guys, like, jiu-jitsu is so big that to do a jiu-jitsu flow chart from beginning to end is almost impossible.
Yeah.
Right? It's the combinations, there would be so many bubbles. So all we're doing is we're chalking off sections, right? That way you, like, if we're in this section, mount, this is multiple options that I have. And it doesn't even have to in there. My guys can go ahead and fill in their own bubbles, right? Like these are the 6 bubbles that I have for mount, but you can make your own bubble here if you need to. If you've got a different thing that you like to do for mount that works for you, then make your own bubble. That's your spot. That's your jiu-jitsu. These are the options that I'm giving you, but you can, that's the great thing about it, it's expansive. And, just like it's a way of the art form, right? Of jiu-jitsu is the transitions from one move or one technique to another technique or a different position. And that's where the art form comes in. And this gives them an idea how to start creating. I don't think of it any different than as a painter with a brush, right? And this is how you shade, right? And then so you learn how to use hash marks or different brushes for different brush strokes, right? And this is how you do it. But now you get to take that. You don't have to do a car. I drew a car. You don't have to draw a car. You can draw something else. Mm-hmm. I do De La Hiva, or I do mount this away, but you do it your own way. These are we kind of talked about this earlier, fundamentals. This is the fundamentals. Now use it to make your jiu-jitsu.
Yeah, so that's awesome. It's great. So I think to wrap this up, ultimately, I think what we're trying to help, last couple of discussions we've had, even the one I had with Ron that we talked about earlier, all we're trying to do as instructors or really as coaches and friends is try to make this learning better, right? You and I came up with, it's going to be different for everybody, but when I started, there was hardly any blue belts in the whole country. I mean, for real, I took seminars and paid $50 to $75 from blue belts, right? That would be unheard of now. But because the access to learning was so hard to find a blue belt, to find a purple belt, and of course anything above it just didn't happen, right? Now every gym's filled with purples and browns. You know what I'm saying? And it's crazy that in the material, right? I didn't have access to the material that everybody has access to now. So on one hand, things are way easier now, right? Which is awesome. But then on the other hand, that overflow of information also makes it hard, right? Meaning that what's good for you is not good for me, right? Like you and I have similar body types, right? Like we might be fine, but like if another 130-pound guy came into the gym that's 5'3", I'm not going to teach him to do some of the things I do with my 6'6" frame or my 250-pound weights, right? It doesn't make sense. So because of that, we need a way, just like you said, there's millions of moves and there's all this thing. We need a way to break that information down and make it more accessible to us and make it clearer to learn, because if you're not on the right path, your path to blue belt, to purple, to brown could be a lot longer. And ultimately as a coach, I want your path to be as short as possible, as clear as possible. I can help along the way, but if you're not using the right tools around the way, right, your method to getting there is going to take a lot longer. So as a coach, I think we're always trying to find ways to make that better for each, so-called student or member of the gym. So anyway, I would say, and I'll let you, finish it up with whatever I'm going to say here, but I would say, number one, definitely take notes. Look, I will admit 100%, you do way better than me. I don't as well. I take notes. I should do better, right? I'll just put it out there. And I am going to do better right now. So I will put myself on film right now and say I'm going to do better. So I do good at seminars and just some other stuff. But I need to review those. So a student of a gym needs to take notes. They need to review them, look at things they're weak on, attack those things, right? A flow chart could help in those things because it's going to keep you on the right path. And then the other thing that we've kind of just talked about recently is if you have access to a curriculum, use that, because all that is telling you, hey, from white to blue, you should know this. From blue to purple, you should know this, right? It's not the end all be all, but it's kind of giving you a general roadmap. Every gym's a little bit different. I know all the instructors that have them out there, which there's a bunch now, they're all a little bit different, but they're all also very similar, right? So use all those tools. If you're using none of those tools, it's going to be harder, right? Some people are going to get lucky and they're going to be a blue belt in a year. Maybe less, maybe more, but that usually has to do with luckily getting on the right path and their athletic ability. But all those things aside, man, I think you should, if I was going to college, I want the right textbook. I want the right teacher. I want to take the right notes. And essentially that's what we're doing. I mean, I know there's memes out there saying it takes longer to get a black belt than it does to get a MD, right? And to be a doctor. And it's true. But I don't want to diminish the fact those doctors are way better than me. so like, I'm not trying to pretend I'm better than them. But so anyway, my point is, like, listen, man, I'm trying to give advice, and so are you, on the best methods. If I had this access when I was young and I didn't, I just got lucky, to get to the right way. But now, just like as you get older and you have access to information, I'm trying to help people that are just starting out, as are you, to get to the end goal, whether it's a black belt or whatever, as fast as you can, as most efficient as you can. So anyway, yeah, do you have anything to add to that? I think that's a good.
Everything you said, I agree with. The only thing I would add to taking notes is come up with your own verbiage. Mm-hmm. Everybody, the one thing that I hear a lot about people talk bad about Eddie Bravo or whatever is like, oh, he's just using a high guard or whatever. But all of that stuff that he does, it's words that made him remember it, right? So like when he's talking about zombie and he's isolating, the hand comes up and he's isolating the arm, he gets the arm trapped outside. That's just his way of remembering, right? Yeah. And so if you've got a word that fits, then use that word and make that part of your verbiage, like that. If it helps you, then it helps you, use what makes sense to you in it and let that be the word for it, No,
that's a great point. Because on that point, I know in college and jiu-jitsu, I have a bad habit of making abbreviations. And then a week or two later, I go back and I have no idea what I wrote. And I think that's what you mentioned earlier. you like to take detailed notes, and that's the purpose, right? So at the end, you know what you wrote and what you're thinking about. So yes, definitely add that. Make sure it's A, something that makes you remember. Then 2, don't do like I do and just make random words that aren't words that I'm going to forget a year from now. And then I sometimes my and honestly, that's probably why I don't take as many notes, because I'm such a bad note taker that I have no idea what I was talking about at the time. So flowchart though actually will be better.
Yeah.
Here's the cure, right? Because now I can draw little bubbles like close guard off to here. So anyway, yeah, no, man, that was perfect. I appreciate it. Yeah, awesome, man. I appreciate everything. And we'll do our next thing here in just a second, okay?
Thanks much, Butch.
All right, thank you.